Good morning, this is Chris Dunaway with the LSU AgCenter. Today we're in Module 15 and we're finally going to be actually talking about how to grow vegetables. I know you're all very excited. It's taken us a long time to get here, but it was crucial that we cover the first steps of gardening and get all the background information out of the way before we even started talking about actual growing vegetables. Today we're going to be talking about cruciferous vegetables. And cruciferous vegetables are your cold crops, your brassicas, and these are in the Brassiaceae family, also formerly known as the Cruciferae. The characteristics are they have alternating leaf arrangements, or rosettes. The flower has 4 sepals, 4 petals, and 2 short or 4 long stamens. See, now, if we had told you all this before taking the botany class, you would not have known a thing we were talking about. So now you're caught up. The flower petals are in opposite arrangement, so they form a cross. The fruit is silique. Is that silique? Silique. The fruit is silique, which is a type of capsule, which means it's longer than it is wide. And the fruit splits in 2 to release the seeds. Usually, and the fruit splits in 2 to release, usually small round seeds. So as it dries out, the two sides split open, and the seeds actually get a little shoot and distance as they pop out. Here's some common cruciferous vegetables, and there are 2 different varieties, or family groups here. We have the Brassica oleracea and the Brassica rapa. Well, it's really interesting to think that, say, broccoli, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, all came from the common ancestor, and things like the turnips and the napa cabbage, likewise. Back in the day, back when we first started hunting and gathering, and we discovered that we could collect seeds from plants, they would select the seeds of plants with characteristics that they like. And as they take these seeds, and over the years and years, they kind of separated out and became these different kinds of vegetables that we see today. What we see now is totally different from the original plant years ago. For growing the brassica crops, they are a cool season crop. That's super important to remember, that these do not grow in the summertime, that this is a fall, winter, and spring crop. So we plant them in the fall, we grow them through the winter, and we can harvest some in the spring. But after that, once the warm weather comes in, we can't grow them anymore. We need to switch to the warm season crops. They can survive a mile frost, some even lower than that. Seeds will germinate as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so this is really nice. Even when the weather is cool, there might be a little bit of frost on the ground, the seeds can still come up. The optimum temperature is usually between 65 and 75 degrees, so you still have a nice little range there, either starting in the fall, when it's still warm, and going into the winter, or even planting a late crop in the spring and getting it in just before the temperature comes up. You can direct seed a lot of these. You have your radish, your turnips, and your mustard greens. They do better when they're direct seeded as opposed to doing transplants. You can direct seed or transplant the collards, the kohlrabi, the kale, arugula, or bok choy. So whichever your choice is, they both work well. You can sometimes say if it's in the middle of the winter, you can get them to germinate and put them out a little bit in the spring. So you get a jump on that, like Dr. Joe was telling you about. And then you always want to transplant your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, and your napa cabbage. They just don't do very well as seeds directly in the garden, and they need that time in the nursery to really do well and perform. They do like well-drained soil that is rich in organic matter. So this is all going back to that really nice porous soil, maybe nice hipped rows, but again, and a nice plenty of humus and compost in there. And the ideal pH is 6 to 6.5. And you want a soil test to get that pH to know what you're dealing with. And then you also want a soil test to get your fertilizing recommendations. So, we have a lot of nutrients in the soil already, and if you add more, your soil test to get your fertilizer recommendations. Generally, they want a complete fertilizer. You apply when you install them, then you can do it 3 to 4 weeks later, and again 2 to 3 weeks after that. So plants are very heavy feeders, and one thing that people don't realize is that they constantly need to have that fertilizer added to them to achieve optimal results. Now, they will grow and they will produce offspring sometimes, but it's just like with humans and having babies. The baby gets the first crack at most of the nutrients, and if the plant doesn't have enough of the nutrients, the children won't develop right, or they will rob the nutrients from the mother, and the mother will just flounder and not do nearly as well. So it's very important to keep your plants fertilized. Plant spacing is very important. Again, a lot of beginner gardeners make the mistake of planting things usually too close together. Let's admit it. Now, this is a general rule, and within each category, varieties may change. So when you are ordering your seeds, pay attention to what size it's going to be and the spacing that it requires. But arugula is usually only about 3 to 4 inches apart. Bok choy gets a little bigger, about 8 to 12 inches apart. Broccoli and Brussels sprouts are a lot bigger, and again 12 to 18 inches, and then 18 to 24. A Brussels sprout gets to be a very large plant. So cabbage, again 12 to 18 inches, and pay very attention to this, because there are lots of varieties of cabbage, and some get very small, and where some are as big as serving plates. And again on down the line, what's interesting, like radishes, is only 1 to 2 inches apart. So you can plant those very closely together. And so like in a square foot garden situation, you would actually have about 8 per square foot. Whereas a Brussels sprout, you would have 1 per 4 square feet. So that's kind of how that layout is. And then days to maturity is something you need to be aware of and pay attention to, so that you'll have the garden, your crops come out when you want them to do too, and know what the schedule's like and how to alternate them and things like that. But there is a wide variety of days and times that it's going to take for these things to get ready. Like arugula takes 45 to 55 days. Bok choy, 40 to 50. Broccoli can take as many as 90 days, so that's like 3 months there that you're waiting. And Brussels sprouts definitely take the longest time. They take about 90 days minimum to get the crop. Things like radishes, 22 to 28 days. So you have to, if you blink, you might miss the time to harvest them. And it's very important you pay attention to what's going on in the garden and the maturity level of these things, so that you pick the crops at the perfect time for their flavor and their edibility. So look at this. This chart here tells us like when is the best time to harvest some of these. So arugula, you want to harvest the young tender leaves. So that's one of those plants that you can actually harvest as you go along. You just pick some of the leaves as you go. You don't necessarily pick the whole plant. If you do, you pick the whole thing when it's about mature age, medium age, not mature. Bok choy, you harvest the whole plant. Broccoli, you want to wait till just before the flower buds open. By the way, if you didn't know it, broccoli is just a giant flower. If you wait too long, the whole thing will flower, and it's actually quite lovely, and the bees and butterflies love it. But you want to wait till those little balls that you see. Each one of those is a little flower bud, and it gets to be about the size of a match head right before it opens, and that's when you want to get it. Cabbage, you want to feel it when the head is firm. That means all those leaves have wrapped in and come close together, so that's nice. Cauliflower, before the curds become loose. Collards, you want nice, dark, green, mature leaves, so these are big leaves. Whereas kale, you want the younger, tender leaves. And on down the line, kohlrabi, you actually measure the size of the size of the plant at the roots, about 2 to 3 inches diameter. And radishes, again, it's only about 1 to 2 inches diameter, and turnips about 2 to 4 inches. And again, like I said, you have to pay attention because the radishes go really quick. You want them at that perfect size. Once they get a little bigger than that, become less palatable, things like that. So it's really important to pay attention. They also start to split when they get too big, which is not a very attractive thing to eat. And then I'm going to switch into pests, and I'm going to let Anna Timmerman come and talk to you about the pests of our crops here.
Hi class. Many of the crops that Chris just spoke to you about have very few pest and disease issues, but you do have to be vigilant because things can get out of hand pretty quickly, even in the fall weather. You know, we think of fall and winter as, especially in New Orleans, one of our easier gardening seasons, but there is still plenty of things out there that are going to attack your crops. So here are just some of them. Aphids. Now, we've all seen aphids in our gardens. If you haven't, you're not looking hard enough. They're definitely there. Aphids really love to attack all of our brassicas. There's different kinds of aphids. It's not one size fits all. There's cabbage aphids, which are sort of a greenish gray color. Green peach aphids that are yellowy green, kind of without a waxy coating. And you're not going to be able to see a lot of these differences without really looking hard or under a hand lens. Turnip aphids, which are whitish green with a waxy coating. But what's important about aphids is diagnosing the damage that they cause. If you're out looking at your crops and you notice the leaves are kind of curled over or kind of cupped, it's a good idea to check the underside of those leaves. We get a lot of calls from home gardeners where it's a picture looking down at the plant and we can see this cupping of the leaves. And our next question is usually always, what's on the underside of those leaves? And sometimes it's aphids. So take a look if you do see those kind of misshapen leaves on your plants. If you notice some chlorotic blotches, remember that's like pale blotches on the top of the leaves, it's a good idea to check the underside of the leaves in that case too, because it could be damage from aphids feeding. They can also transmit viruses. You'll remember in the plant pathology class, we did talk about how insects can act as vectors for plant viruses and move them from plant to plant within the garden. So it's important to be aware of that and control aphids if you do have an infestation. You would control them in a number of ways. You can use malathion, neem oil, horticultural oil, or insecticidal soaps. Now we see a lot of homemade soap recipes online to control things like this using Dawn dish detergent. You really want to invest in that insecticidal soap. We did talk about that in the pesticide module. It's just a much better product, much more effective, and it's not that expensive. So that's available at all garden centers, and it really is effective on aphids. There are parasitic wasps that will attack aphids. That's really neat. So if you flip those leaves over and look at the underside, and you notice all the aphids are kind of a dark brown or black color, if you were to look under a microscope or with a magnifying glass at those aphids, you'd notice each and every one of them has a hole in its back. And what that is that's the hole where a parasitic wasp has emerged from it. Pretty cool stuff, fighting nature with nature. If you see aphids like that, there's no need to spray, they're already dead. Ladybugs also eat aphids. That's something we all learned in elementary school. So you do really want to encourage lady beetles in your garden because they do a great job of controlling these. And remember the lady beetle larvae, they're those little alligator looking things, and we did have that in the beneficial insects module. So you know what they look like and you shouldn't freak out if you see them. They're doing you a favor. There's also some civet flies and lacewings. I have a lot of lacewings at my garden. They're small and green and they eat a ton of aphids. So really keep in mind your beneficial insects. If you see the aphids and see beneficials present, maybe you don't need to spray. They're going to get controlled for you naturally. Jumping right into lepidopteran pests, this is a fairly common issue in a lot of pole crops here in New Orleans because we have very mild winters. There are still moth species out and about, they're laying their eggs, and then their caterpillars like to feed on our vegetables. The damage is usually these ragged holes, and we get a lot of calls about this in the fall and the winter. And you will often see what's called frass. Frass is just a fancy word for caterpillar poop. It's probably one of my favorite gardening terms ever. It's just a funny word. But you will see balls of caterpillar poop on the leaves where the insects have been feeding, and that's a dead giveaway that you've got a caterpillar problem. Even if you can't see the caterpillars, they're there, they're feeding, and they're pooping, so you know you've got a problem. You can control them with BT or spinosad. Those are both really good products. They're organic, easy to find at the garden center. You could use kale and clay to kind of coat the leaves and make them unappealing for feeding insects. There are parasitic wasps and flies that will actually lay their eggs on caterpillars. A lot of wasps will actually collect caterpillars to feed to their young in the nests as well. You can use pyrethrins, carbaryl, vasna, or cifrulin. What is it?
Cyfluthrin.
Cyfluthrin. Sorry. This is going on the blooper reel. How do you pronounce it?
Cyfluthrin.
Cyfluthrin. Okay, you're gonna cut that together. To control these things as well. I'm an organic gardener, so if I have caterpillars, lepidopteran caterpillars in my garden, I'm usually reaching for BT or spinosad. Those are very, very effective. They're easy to use. A little goes a long way, and it's just an overall good control for soft-bodied insects like caterpillars. Here are some of the specifics that we see a lot. The cabbage webworm. They attack other crops, not just cabbage, so keep in mind that. The larvae are kind of this yellowish color, and they have some stripes. As they get older, they might have no stripes. They do feed on the underside. They kind of scratch away at the leaf surface. They weave webs for protection, hence webworm. So if you're looking on the underside or inside the leaves where they get kind of tight and you see webbing, you might have caterpillars. Now, a lot of people think they have a spider problem. Other things do make webs as well, and this webworm is one of them. The adult turns into what I like to call one of the boring brown moths. Although it's not that boring, it's kind of pretty if you look at it. It's a light brown and gray kind of mottled appearance, and it's got kind of a kidney-shaped spot on the forewing. They're very small. They're only 3/4 of an inch long. Most of these fall pests are very small, and if you're not looking closely, it's hard to tell them apart. Here's the cabbage looper. And this one's really fun. If you remember the Eric Carle book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, this guy always reminds me of that book. It's a small green kind of inchworm caterpillar, very classic looking, and they do like to eat a lot, so they are very hungry caterpillars. They have 2 white stripes on either side, and you see how they do kind of arch up and inch along as they move through the garden. The adult is another boring gray moth. It's kind of mottled brown and gray, and it's about 1.5 inch wingspan, so it's a little bigger than the last webworm we saw. And it's got kind of a shiny figure 8 on it, so that's how you can ID it. Generally, if I see a green caterpillar in the fall and winter, I know that I got loopers. It's a very common pest here in New Orleans. The cross-striped cabbage worm is a kind of a beautiful looking caterpillar if you look at it. The larva is bluish-gray with some black banding and a yellow line, and I have not seen these as often here in the area. Another boring gray moth with a 1-inch wingspan. And remember, you control all of these in the same way. You would reach for your BT or your spinosad and get out there and spray tops and bottoms of your plants once a week. And that's just a really effective control. The great southern white, this is actually kind of a nice looking butterfly. The larvae are kind of a yellow and gray striping, and I like seeing these because I like the butterflies personally. The adult butterfly is 2.5 to 3.5 inch wingspan, so it's a decent sized butterfly. And the male wings are white with a black margin and zigzag, and the female color varies. They can be white to kind of a gray color, and they have a black margin and a small black dot on the forewing. So you can actually tell if you've got males or females in your garden, which is just kind of a nice trivia thing to know. But if you get good, you know you've got females laying eggs, you know you can expect some caterpillar damage in a few days. So good thing to know. Diamondback moths, these are very common in our area, especially in the fall. They start showing up around October in our area. They are kind of a green caterpillar with some pointed black hairs that are very hard to see without a hand lens. The adult moth, again, that's one of our brown moths that we see around about 1 inch, and it's got kind of a translucent underwing to it. And sometimes you'll be walking or working in your garden and these guys will fly up, especially in the early mornings, because that's when they're active, at least in my experience. And the males and the females do have different markings, so you can tell them apart also. The beet armyworm. Now, we've seen the armyworms in our pest lecture that attack things this time of year. This beet armyworm is a different kind of armyworm than the ones that we've discussed previously. So this is one that attacks, again, more than just beets. I've seen them on turnips, I've seen them on kale. They are out and about. The caterpillar is kind of this dull green color, and again, we've got a brown moth. You're seeing a pattern here. So if you're out in your garden and you start seeing these brown moths this fall, you know it's probably a pest species. Good rule of thumb. Imported cabbage worm. Now this is another one that's actually a butterfly, and it's kind of pretty. It's got a nice, beautiful caterpillar with a green coloration and a yellow stripe right down the dorsal. The adult is a white butterfly. It doesn't have that border like the last one did. It's more of a spotted appearance, and these are about 1.5 inches. I've actually never seen these in the greater New Orleans area, but I'm watching for them. The females have 2 black spots on the top of each of their forewings, and the males only have 1. So that's how you can tell those guys apart. This is a really common insect pest in our area, even in the summertime, the harlequin bug. Now, it's called harlequin bug for some pretty obvious reasons. It's a very colorful insect, and the eggs are fantastic. They look almost like swirl ice cream. Very cool. We get a lot of calls about these guys this time of year, especially if you have any pole crops that you may be left too long in the garden, and the summer heat and the summer pests are out. This is one of them that loves to find that kale plant that maybe you let go too long. They're an adult shield bug. They've got that kind of flat appearance, and you can see they're that red and black pattern. I think it's really beautiful, and depending on what instar are in that pattern does change. The nymph has the same markings, but it's slightly different. You can see that very well in that picture. Both the adults and the nymphs suck sap from the plant, so they're going to suck that plant dry. They're going to vector some diseases sometimes. They cause it to wilt, and they can cause the plant to die also. They're really hard to control in a garden. Personally, I'm out there with a cup of soapy water in the mornings, knocking them into that, along with my leaf-footed bugs and my southern green stink bugs every morning. It's a really cathartic thing to do as you're drinking your coffee. So that's actually the best way to control them in a home setting. You can spray for them, but the older they get, they just run from the spray. They're very mobile, they're fast. You'll come by with your sprayer and you flip down on the underside of the leaves. It has to contact them to work. Best thing to do in this case is candy removal. Squish on site, SOS, also works. Flea beetles. Now these things are the bane of my existence sometimes with my arugula. They really, really can do some damage. It's always manifested as this kind of stippling pattern on the leaf where they're feeding. And we've got a couple of different kinds here in the area. The turnip flea beetle, the cruciferous flea beetle. They really can do a number on a lot of different crops. They're a big pest in beans too, different kind of flea beetle. The adults do chew those little small holes in the leaves, giving them that seed-like appearance. So you can hold the leaf up to the sun and the light comes through like pinpoints. And the larvae feed on the underground plant parts. So you see the adults up above in the canopy of the plant, but just know if you've got a lot of adults, that also means you've got a lot of larvae damaging the roots. So it's a 1-2 punch in your garden. Control of these guys is very difficult. They're flea beetles, they jump around a lot, they move. You come by with your sprayer, they jump in all directions. But if you do want to control them, we've got some options. In my garden, I reach for the neem oil. I have some kale in play that I'm going to trial out this fall. And if you have to reach for some chemical controls, you have some choices. Next up, Joe's going to talk to you about some of the diseases you see in your pole crops.
Thanks, Anna and Chris. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about pests, or some common pole crop diseases that you're probably going to see in your garden. And the idea is to get you used to recognizing the different diseases, or at least get an idea, because remember what we told you about the insects, about diseases and everything like that is, The main thing in controlling them, the very first thing you want to do is know what it is. You want to be able to identify it, because until you know for sure what you're dealing with, the control mechanisms that you want to use may vary. And if you use the wrong control mechanism because you misidentified your insect or your disease, then it's not going to do you any good. So remember that you have this presentation that you can refer back to. It's got a lot of good information on it. It's the slideshow. And we probably aren't going to tell you everything that's on there, like those tables that Chris had earlier. But keep that in mind that if you want to go back and get the information, it's there, along with the supplemental material that we provide for you. So now I'm going to go through some of those common cold crop diseases. One of them, which if you grow cold crops almost anywhere, you're going to see it. No matter how you grow them, organically or whatever, at some point you're going to see downy mildew. And it's kind of a gray mold that grows on the lower surface of the leaf. And from the upper surface, you'll see something that looks like this. It's kind of spotty, chlorotic, even necrotic lesions on top of the leaf. And if you were able to flip the leaf over while it's still actively growing, you'll see this grayish mold growing on the other side of the leaf. It is a fungal disease, and there are resistant varieties to downy mildew. So the best and first choice is to grow varieties that are resistant to downy mildew, if downy mildew is a problem. Second, another of the IPM ways of controlling it is doing crop rotation by putting in crops that are not susceptible to the downy mildew that attacks the cold crops. And then the fungus will die after a few seasons. You can come back in then with something that, with the cold crops again. The fungus will survive on the old plant material and continue to spoil it. So what you want to do is remove all of that plant debris as soon as it's there. And if you see diseased leaves like the one on these pictures, go ahead and cut those off and get rid of them, because if you leave them on your plant, they're just going to be there with the fungus growing and producing spores to spread the disease around to the rest of your plants. So remove that plant debris as soon as possible. That's again going to the sanitation part of controlling the disease, keeping things clean as much as possible. And it is a fungal disease, so it likes to have the leaf surface wet to help it to infect. So avoid wetting the leaves. With your irrigation system, set it up so that you're just watering the roots where the water is actually needed. Avoid overhead watering. Avoid late day evening watering, because the plants will stay wet longer into the evening. So just keep that in mind, that these fungal diseases, as we show those like to have the leaf surfaces wet. So avoid wetting the leaves. And of course, if it's a real problem, there are some chemical controls, chlorothalonil, copper are both ones that can help to control the disease. Now these will act as protectants. Once a plant has it, we aren't going to cure it, but it spreads from leaf to leaf. So these are more like protectants. So once you see it showing up, get rid of those leaves that are infected, and if you have to go with the chemicals, spray it to protect it. Another disease is alternaria leaf spot. Now, there are several leaf spots that you're going to see that affect vegetables in your garden. With the cold crops, alternaria leaf spot is one, and it's very, these spots are very symptomatic of what the alternaria leaf spot looks like. You'll have the lesions with concentric rings, as you can see on this picture here. It looks like a ring, and then a larger ring, and then a larger ring, and then a larger. That's the concentric ring appearance that it gives, and it's usually surrounded by a yellow halo or chlorotic halo. The leaves will get completely infected. They'll turn totally yellow, drop off. It can be a really devastating disease if you don't control it. And once again, it likes to have that moisture there. You see on the cabbage up there, it infects the head, so it's infecting the leaves, but of course the head is made up of leaves. And you can also get infections, you've probably seen this even on, sometimes you can buy cauliflower at the grocery store, they'll show like this, they'll have little dark spots on the white curds. That can be alternaria that's causing that. So control again, you want to remove the plant debris as soon as possible. You can do crop rotation, avoid wetting the leaves, and then if you need to use chemical growers, you can go with chlorothalonil. Black rot is one that we see a lot actually in our area, and it's a bacterial disease caused by Xanthomonas campestris, cauliflower campestris. And the pattern is very symptomatic and emblematic of what the black rot looks like, that you'll see right here. It's usually V-shaped lesions. They start at the margin of the leaf, and they'll make a V-shaped necrotic lesion with a chlorotic halo around it. And the V usually will follow the veins in the leaf. And so that V-shaped pattern, especially you see there in the lower right corner, that is very, very, very symptomatic of what black rot looks like on your cold crops. And if you were to cut the stem open from infected plants, you can see that dark necrotic tissue that's in the living area, the cambial area of the plant. It gets darkened by the bacterium, so that's also a very distinctive symptom of black rot. And with black rot, there are some somewhat tolerant varieties that you can grow. There are no true resistant varieties. There are some that tolerate the disease somewhat and will still produce. So you look for that black rot tolerant varieties in your seed catalog. Once again, good sanitation. Remove the debris as much as possible. Get rid of it. You don't want it left laying around. And it is a seed transmitted disease, so the bacteria can be in the seed. So you want to make sure that you're getting disease-free seed that you start with. And once again, we talked to you about that. Getting certified disease-free seed or certified disease-free plants is a really good way to go. Remember, start clean, stay clean. And for this disease, starting clean means making sure you've got disease-free seed. And again, no overhead irrigation. It's just not a good thing. Another common disease, now this is a fungal disease, and it's called blackleg. And with that, what you actually see, which is very symptomatic of the blackleg, the lower right corner there you see, is you'll have an ashy gray lesion, and then you'll have little black spots on it. Those black spots are actually the reproductive parts of the fungus as it's growing and reproducing and getting ready to spread to your other plants. So once again, good sanitation. Get rid of disease material as soon as you can. Once you see disease material, whether it's the leaves or the plant or whatever, no matter what you do to it, it's not going to heal and go back to being what it was. If you have a leaf that looks like this and you treat it for the fungus, it's not going to suddenly get back green and grow back over that lesion and make a nice big green leaf again. Diseased leaves, diseased tissue is going to stay diseased on your plants. The best thing to do is to excise it. Get rid of it. Don't leave it there to allow the fungus or the bacterium to spread from one diseased plant to a healthy plant, or even with diseases like this, from lower leaves that are infected to the upper leaves. If you can get rid of the disease inoculum, you can actually lower the chances of developing the disease. It will also attack the stems of plants, and you can see it makes that black sunken lesion. Those will also kind of turn an ashy gray and have those dark spots in them. Now with blackleg, once again, there are no truly resistant varieties, but there are varieties that are somewhat tolerant of the disease. So look for those that are somewhat tolerant. Like I said, good sanitation. And once again, you want to get disease-free seed, because this one can go through the seed. So get disease-free seed as much as possible. Avoid overhead irrigation. Now, some common viruses. Now, if you look at the pictures, like again, we're talking to you about identify. Because some of the symptoms of viruses are necrotic spots with halos around them. Same thing you would see with a fungal disease, same thing you might see with a bacterial disease. So if you have a virus and you treat it like it's a fungus, it's not going to do you any good. Or the other way around, if you have a fungal disease or a bacterial disease and you treat it like a viral disease, it's not going to do you any good. So you want to identify what the disease is before you do any kind of treatments. And you want to for sure know what it is. Now, a couple of common ones are turnip mosaic virus and cauliflower mosaic virus. The plants will probably look stunted, especially if it's infected early. It'll reduce the size of them. It'll distort the leaves, and you'll actually have the black spots developing on the heads of your cabbage. You can see the black spots develop at different parts of the plant, and you get that mosaic effect. Remember the mosaic effect? The light green, dark green, light green, dark green, mosaic effect. Both of these viruses will give you that. And one good way of controlling it, like I said, once the plant has it, you can't cure it of the virus. However, what you want to do is try to break one of those links. And one link you can break is remove the weeds. Keep it weed free. Because a lot of times, cruciferous weeds will grow in the same area as your garden. Or just weeds in general. Don't have to identify whether they're cruciferous weeds or not. Just keep your garden weed free. Because the weeds will sometimes harbor the insects or the disease itself, and it gets transmitted from the weed to your crop. So keep it weed free. That is one of the best ways to control these two viruses in your cold crops. Now, we told you a lot about diseases and insects. We told you how to grow the crop. But we'll only end with this, let you know, even though we told you that there's a lot of insects that love your cold crops just as much as you love them, sometimes more, and there are diseases that may attack. If you're doing a nice program of IPM, as Chris told you, you got all the growing conditions correct with the right pH of the soil, you're giving them plenty of sunshine, you're avoiding overhead watering so that the plants are staying dry as much as possible, you're keeping an eye out for the insects, and you're only using insecticides as a last resort. That means you're going to have a good population of the beneficials there that will keep your insects in check. So all of that to say, you can have a beautiful harvest from your garden, just like this picture. All these lovely, healthy, fresh vegetables just waiting to nourish you. So I hope you enjoyed this class. I hope you learned a little bit about growing the cold crops. And we wanted to go ahead and give you this one as soon as possible, because in our area and in many other areas of the country right now is at the time that you want to plant your seed to start your transplants for some of your cold crops. So in our area, July, early August is when we start planting our seeds for our fall crops. So we're going to go ahead and start ours. So we started you out with the cold crops. Get them started, be ready, and you can be successful.